Before electricity, before alarm clocks were common, someone had to wake the city up. In parts of America and Britain, that person was paid to walk the streets before dawn, tap on bedroom windows with a long pole, and keep moving until they were sure you were awake. They were called knocker-uppers. And they were completely normal. Around the same time, other men were cutting blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers in the middle of winter, hauling them into storage, and delivering them door to door through the summer months. That was their entire job. That was how people kept food cold. And before you could dial a number, before the phone even had a dial, you picked up the receiver and a real human being asked you who you wanted to reach. And they connected the call by hand. They sat in rows, in large rooms, plugging wires into boards all day long. These were real jobs, and they were completely normal. Work has never been fixed. It shifts with technology, with need, with the shape of daily life. And when you look back at what people were paid to do, you start to realize how strange the present must look from far enough away. Here are some of the most unusual jobs in American history. Not myths, not exaggerations. Real occupations that real people held, often for their entire working lives. The ice trade is one of the stranger industries America ever produced. Before mechanical refrigeration became affordable and widespread, people still needed cold. Restaurants needed it. Hospitals needed it. Wealthy households expected it. And someone had to provide it. In the early and middle 19th century, teams of men called ice cutters went to work on frozen lakes and rivers across the northern United States. The business grew into a major industry, centered heavily in New England, particularly around Walden Pond in Massachusetts and the lakes of Maine. Frederick Tudor of Boston turned it into an empire. He shipped ice as far as the Caribbean, South America, and India. He became known as the Ice King. The work itself was brutal and specific. Workers used large, two-handled saws to cut straight lines through ice that could be 2 feet thick. They scored the surface in a grid, then broke the blocks apart with long iron bars. Each block weighed between 300 and 400 pounds. The men worked fast. Ice does not wait. Once cut, the blocks were floated to the shore, loaded onto horse-drawn sleds, and hauled to insulated storage buildings called ice houses. There, the blocks were packed in sawdust, which slowed the melting. Some ice survived in storage for over a year. Through the warmer months, ice wagons moved through city neighborhoods delivering blocks directly to homes. Families had ice boxes, wooden cabinets lined with tin or zinc, where the ice sat in a lower compartment and kept food cool above it. Children would follow the ice wagon in summer, collecting the chips that fell from the saw. The job faded as mechanical refrigeration improved and became affordable. By the 1930s, the commercial ice trade was in serious decline. By mid-century, it was essentially gone. The lakes went quiet in winter for the first time in 100 years. The knocker-upper is usually associated with Britain, but the practice existed in America as well, particularly in industrial cities where factories ran on strict shift schedules and most workers could not afford or did not trust mechanical clocks. The job was simple. A person was paid to walk a neighborhood before dawn and wake their clients up. The tools varied. Some used long bamboo poles to tap on upper-floor windows. Others used small pea shooters to fire dried peas against the glass. Some knocked on doors. The method mattered less than the result. The person inside had to actually wake up and acknowledge it before the knocker-upper moved on. They were hired directly by the workers themselves, usually for a few pennies a week. In some cases, foremen or factory owners paid them to ensure their workforce arrived on time. It was a practical arrangement. Losing your shift could mean losing your job. A knocker-upper was cheap insurance. The role required a certain trustworthiness. Clients expected to be woken reliably, not sometimes. And someone had to wake the knocker-uppers. That question was often asked, and the answer was that many of them simply stayed up through the night, working other jobs or keeping unusual hours by habit. The profession faded as cheap, reliable alarm clocks became widely available in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. When a small mechanical device could do the job for a one-time cost, there was no economic reason to keep paying a person to walk the streets. The switchboard operator is one of the most visible vanished jobs in American history, and also one of the most overlooked. When Alexander Graham Bell's telephone network began to expand in the late 1870s, someone had to manage the connections. The technology of the time could not route calls automatically. Every call had to go through a central office, where an operator received the incoming signal, asked who the caller wanted to reach, located that subscriber's line on a large panel of jacks, and physically connected the two lines with a patch cord. The early operators were teenage boys. They were cheap, available, and familiar with telegraph work. They were also, by most accounts, rude, easily distracted, and prone to playing pranks on callers. Within a few years, telephone companies began replacing them with women. Women were considered more patient, more polite, and more willing to be helpful under pressure. Emma Nutt, hired in Boston in 1878, is widely recognized as the first female telephone operator in America. The workforce became almost entirely female. At the peak of the industry in the 1930s and 40s, hundreds of thousands of women worked as operators across the country. They memorized local subscriber lists. They handled emergency calls. They gave out time and weather information. In small towns, the operator often knew everyone on the exchange by name and could locate someone simply by knowing their habits. The job required fast hands and a calm voice. Operators worked at longboards with dozens of jacks in front of them, headsets on, handling up to several hundred calls in a single shift. The pace was relentless. Supervisors monitored them constantly. Bathroom breaks were timed. Automation began gradually in the 1920s with the rotary dial, which allowed callers to route their own local calls. Long distance still required operators for decades. The last manual telephone exchange in the United States closed in the 1980s. By then, the job that had employed hundreds of thousands of women had been almost entirely replaced by switching hardware. Rat catching was a real and sometimes well-paid profession in American cities during the 19th century. Cities in that era had a serious rat problem. Grain warehouses, slaughterhouses, docks, and market districts all provided ideal conditions for large rat populations. Rats contaminated food supplies, spread disease, and caused structural damage to buildings. Municipal governments and private businesses both paid for their removal. Professional rat catchers used dogs, traps, and their own hands. Terrier breeds were prized for the work, particularly small, fast dogs that could follow rats into narrow spaces. Some catchers worked in tandem with their dogs, driving rats out of walls and floors and letting the dogs finish the work. Others used cage traps, clearing them daily and drowning or suffocating the contents. The more theatrical side of the profession involved live rat catching for what were called rat baiting events, a spectator practice where a dog was placed in a pit with a large number of live rats and timed to see how quickly it could kill them all. This was common entertainment in certain urban areas through the mid-19th century and required a supply of live rats, which catchers could sell. Some catchers made more from supplying rats to these events than from extermination contracts. The profession did not disappear in one moment. It faded as cities developed better sanitation infrastructure, as building standards improved, and as commercial pest control services with standardized methods and chemical options replaced the individual contractor. The image of a man and his dog clearing a warehouse of rats moved from the ordinary to the eccentric over the course of a few decades. Lamplighters were a fixture of American city life through much of the 19th century. Gas streetlights first appeared in American cities in the 1820s and 30s. They required someone to light them every evening and extinguish them every morning. That person was the lamplighter. He carried a long pole with a small flame at the tip, moved along a fixed route, reached up to open each lamp's valve, touched the flame to the gas jet, and moved on. The work was methodical. A single lamplighter might be responsible for dozens of lamps along a specific stretch of street. It was not glamorous work. It required showing up every evening without fail, in any weather. In winter, the cold made the gas jet slow to catch. In wind, flames extinguished before the next lamp was reached. Lamplighters developed specific techniques to move efficiently and deal with equipment that failed in predictable ways. The job also carried a kind of social function. The lamplighter was a recognizable figure in the neighborhood. His presence at dusk was part of the rhythm of city life, a signal that the working day was ending and the evening was beginning. Electric streetlights began replacing gas lamps in American cities starting in the 1880s. Thomas Edison's system in Lower Manhattan in 1882 was an early demonstration of what was coming. The transition happened city block by city block, over years and then decades. By the early 20th century, lamplighters were rare. By the 1930s, the job was nearly gone. The Gandhi dancer is a term that has survived longer than the job itself. Railroad track maintenance in the 19th and early 20th century was done almost entirely by hand. Teams of workers, called section gangs, were responsible for maintaining specific stretches of track. They checked the alignment of rails, replaced rotting wooden ties, drove spikes, and packed the gravel ballast that kept the track stable. The work was constant. Track that carried daily traffic shifted and settled and needed continuous correction. The name Gandhi dancer likely comes from the Gandhi Manufacturing Company of Chicago, which made many of the tools used in track work, including the tamping bars and lining bars that workers moved in rhythmic, coordinated motions. The dancing part referred to the swaying and hopping movements workers made while using these heavy tools together. Groups synchronized their movements with work songs and calls. The rhythm made coordinated lifting and tamping more efficient. The workforce was heavily drawn from immigrant laborers, Chinese workers in the West, Irish workers in the East and Midwest, and later black workers in the South. The pay was low. The conditions were difficult. Workers often lived in railside camps, moving along the line as maintenance required. Mechanized track maintenance equipment began replacing hand gangs after World War II. Machines that could tamp and align track far faster than human crews made most of the manual work economically unjustifiable. The Gandhi dancer was not eliminated overnight, but the workforce shrank steadily through the 1950s and 60s. Today, specialized machines do in hours what once required dozens of men working for days. Before the age of mass communication, before radio or television or the internet, there was a profession built entirely around the movement of information by foot. The bill poster walked the city with buckets of paste and rolled paper. His job was to cover walls, fences, construction hoardings, and any available surface with printed announcements, circus dates, political rallies, patent medicine advertisements, theatrical performances. He worked at night in many cases, when foot traffic was low and surfaces were available. He moved fast. The work required physical endurance more than skill. A bill poster might cover several miles of wall surface in a single shift. Competing firms sometimes sent workers to paste over each other's advertisements before the paste had fully dried, leading to an escalating cycle of coverage and counter-coverage in high-traffic areas. This eventually led to standardized advertising spaces and, later, to the regulated billboard industry. Bill posting was a recognized trade with its own professional associations by the late 19th century. The International Bill Posters Association of North America was founded in 1872. Members negotiated for exclusive rights to certain surfaces, maintained equipment, and trained apprentices. The job faded as advertising moved toward newspapers, radio, and eventually television. The surfaces that once required a person with a bucket of paste and a brush could increasingly be replaced by printed billboards mounted by contractors with trucks. The bill posters' daily route through the city became unnecessary. What these jobs share is not strangeness, not to the people who held them. To an ice cutter in Maine, dragging 300-pound blocks across a frozen lake was simply Tuesday. To a switchboard operator in Chicago, connecting 200 calls before lunch with the job, nothing more. To the lamplighter moving through a quiet street at dusk, the route was as familiar as a commute. Every era produces work that fits its moment. The tools available, the problems that need solving, the gaps that exist between what people need and what machines can yet do. Those gaps are where workers live. The jobs disappear when something changes. A new machine, a new network, a cheaper solution, sometimes gradually, over generations, sometimes quickly, within a decade. The people who held those jobs often found others. Sometimes they did not. What feels ordinary now will look strange later. The jobs of today, the ones that seem permanent and self-evident, exist inside the same logic. They are answers to problems that currently have no better solution. When a better solution arrives, they will go the same way the knocker-upper went, quietly, practically, and without much ceremony. The way people work has always been a reflection of what the world currently needs done. And the world keeps changing what it needs.